Okay, so Meta has released Llama-3.1-405B, and in fact, they've released Llama 3.1, updating both the 70 billion model, the 8 billion model, and of course, the new 405 model. So in this little video, I'm going to have a look at some of the things that are new. We'll have a play with it in code. I'm actually going to show you two ways that you can run it, whether you want to run it with the Hugging Face Transformers library, or if you want to run it via Grok. You can do both of those quite easily. And also, if you want to use the 405 model, Meta's actually serving that in the cloud themselves, which you can try out. So one of the first things that we see in this group of models that actually Meta is calling a herd of Llama models here is that they've expanded the context window to 128,000 for all three models. So this is not just the new 405B model, but this is also the updated Llama 3.1 8 billion and the Llama 3.1 70 billion model in here. And it does seem that they've also done quite a bit of new post-training or different sort of supervised fine-tuning and instruction tuning and distillation on all of the models to improve the results that they're getting out of these models. Interestingly, Meta also seems to have done deals with most of the cloud providers here. So everyone from AWS, NVIDIA, Google, Azure, Grok, they're all serving this model in the cloud. So it does seem like they've put quite a bit of effort into making sure that you will be able to access this model from almost any cloud provider. Now, jumping into the benchmarks here, these are quite interesting. So it's not like this 405 model is a GPT-4 killer. I respect the fact that they've put both benchmarks for all the original GPT-4 model, the GPT-4 Omni, and also the Claude 3.5 Sonnet in here. And you find that, okay, often the Llama 3.1 comes second to one of the GPT-4 or the Claude models, but it is extremely close. So if you look at some of these, for example, the MMLU, zero-shot MMLU, it's getting 88.6, and GPT-4 Omni is getting 88.7. That's really fine there, and it's actually beating Claude 3.5 Sonnet there. On the human eval, okay, Claude 3.5 Sonnet is winning, but again, the Llama 3.1-405 model is very close to this, and you can see this for quite a number of them. And for some of them, actually, the Llama model is actually winning. So if we look at GSM 8K, we can see that the 405 billion model is 96.8, which is beating both the original GPT-4 and the GPT-4 Omni and Claude 3.5 Sonnet in here. And this seems to be reinforced in the paper that came along with the model, where they talk a lot about using synthetic data to create better fine-tuning data for reasoning and for math and for code. So they clearly have put a lot of effort into some of these things. If we look at the smaller models, looking at the 8 billion model, even that is pretty amazing that it's doing so well on MMLU, clearly beating models like the Mistral 7B, the Mistral 8x22B Instruct, as well as things like Gemma 2 9B. And again, even the 8 billion model we can see is very strong on GSM 8K with getting 84.5 there, and the 70 billion getting 95.1. Actually, the 70 billion model is really like a star in here in that its scores are really not that far off the 405 billion model, but obviously it's going to be much easier to serve and to use, etc. Another big factor that they've introduced in these versions of the models is the whole idea of multilingual modeling. So I think they're supporting 8 languages out of the box. And I guess with their new tokenizer, they're also able to be fine-tuned for other languages, probably a lot better, certainly a lot better than the Llama 2 models, but also perhaps a lot better than some of the other models, the Mistral multilingual model that just came out recently. So they also have a bunch of stats in here of how they do on human evaluation and how this actually compares to the GPT-4 models, where they're actually winning, where they're tied. It does seem like GPT-4 perhaps has a little bit of an edge or a quite bit of a decent edge with the 4.0 model, although it looks like the Llama 3.405 is actually beating the Claude Sonnet for a lot of the human evaluations that they've got in here. So all three of the models are trained on over 15 trillion tokens, with I think the 405 being trained on 15.6 trillion tokens in here. They've got a full breakdown of what some of the things that they've done. The key things I think are really interesting is it does look like they've used a lot of synthetic data for the supervised fine tuning, for things like doing the alignment with DPO, and also for basically fine tuning the context window out to 128K. So it's going to be really interesting to see with the whole sort of needle in a haystack test how this actually performs. My guess is that they will have done some kind of fine tuning specifically for that in here. Another element that they're talking about, which is really interesting, is the whole idea of the Llama system. So the models themselves have been trained for tool use, and it looks like they're basically trying to set up a system where you can actually, use this model to call tools directly. And I'll show you in a second with the prompt. It's interesting how they've added a new role for tool use in there. As I mentioned earlier on, they've already got this set up for a number of different tasks with many of the cloud providers here. So all the cloud providers seem to be providing real-time inference, but they also got many of them set up for doing fine-tuning of the model, doing model evaluation, and some of them, like NVIDIA, are actually set up also to do continual pre-training in here. Let's jump into the code and have a play with the model and see how the 8B and the 70B comparing, and then we'll have a look at perhaps where you can try out the 405B as well. Okay, so first off, to basically get access to the model, you have to agree to Llama's license and stuff like that. So you will need to come in here and be granted access to the model because it's a gated model in this case. Once you've got that done, the other thing is you want to make sure that you've got the latest version of Transformers. So it does look like they've added some things in Transformers for the rotary positional embeddings here. So just make sure that you've upgraded the Transformers in here. Then in this case, I'm basically just loading up the 3.1. I'm using an L4 here. You may be able to get it to fit on a T4. Obviously, if you're using the 70 billion, you're going to need multiple GPUs in here. If you're using the 405 billion, you're going to need 2 nodes of 8 A100s or H100s in there. So for most people, that's probably going to be quite challenging to actually run that where you can test this out. Okay, so you've got a number of different ways you can run it. In here, I'm going to show you just using the pipeline. So one of the good things about this is it does seem that Hugging Face has updated it so you can use the text generation pipeline. It will work straight out. Just make sure you've got device map set to auto, especially if you're using multiple GPUs in here. One of the good things about using the pipeline is that we can actually just use the tokenizer and apply the chat template in here. And one of the things that I always like to do for these models when I'm testing the system message is I give it a thing where I say, okay, always respond in the style of a drunk person who slurs their words. And I must say, this is where you can sort of see the quality of the model in here, that very quickly it gets, and it's basically in character or certainly paying attention to the system message in here. You can see by this sort of like burping and slurring as it's basically returning back to us. All right, so the prompt format, stuff like that, I've got in there. Let's get generating. So I'm not going to go through each one in heavy detail. You can go through it yourself, try it out. I suggest you try out your own prompts that you like as well. Interestingly, you can see here that the chain of thought is quite different than, say, the Gemma models or even the new GPT mini model. It seems to be almost simplified in some of these simpler sort of examples where it's going into detail, but it's not sort of doing it in a numbered list per se, which is kind of interesting to see. We do get that kind of numbered list and the different steps of chain of thought when we ask the question about the different, like llama, vacuna, alpaca. Again, we see this kind of change, which is kind of interesting that it's the same kind of change that we've seen in the OpenAI GPT mini here, but now it's breaking it down by physical characteristics, size, purpose, and it's doing it for each one of these. So llama, vacuna, alpaca, where it does it for each of these. And you can see here that it's obviously cut off because I only gave it a couple of 100 tokens or 500 tokens in there. We can see that it's going to keep going like that, where it's going to break it down for each one of the things. Now, it is interesting that we get some refusals in here. So the first one is write a short email to Sam Altman giving the reasons to open source GPT-4. And it basically says, I can't assist with that. Is there anything else I can help you with? So that seems a bit extreme compared to the previous version was having no problem with that. When I ask it to do it in the style of the 5-year-old boy, so perhaps it's maybe just because it's reading that it's a Llama 3 agent that it can't do it. But when it's a 5-year-old boy, it has no problem doing it in here. And when I tell it, you're Kate, the vice president of the USA, it actually then constructs a really good email out here. And notice the email is actually quite nice prose. It's not actually just breaking it down into sort of the steps and stuff like that as we go through it. I'm going back to the one with the young boy. Again, we've got something that's quite short. We've got something a little bit comical where it says, I'll promise I'll even eat my veggies if you open source GPT-4, which is quite funny. Another one that I thought was pretty good in here was that when we ask at the capital of England, remember that they often are far too verbose. And here, first time it says the capital of England is London. When I ask the same thing and say, look, be short and succinct and only use one word if you can, it just comes back with London. So that's really good to sort of see in here. We've got some really nice chain of thought for the question about Geoffrey Hinton having a conversation with George Washington. And in many ways, this breakdown is kind of similar to the GPT-4o mini that we saw recently about the time period and stuff like that going on here and communication methods in here. For the story writing, I'll let you go through it yourself. It seems to be perhaps getting a bit better than what they had before for story writing. Code gen seems to be reasonably good. Let's have a look at the GSM 8K. Again, here we're seeing very clear chain of thought coming out when we ask for it. Now, the 8 billion version here still messes up on the rounding error for the girl for babysitting here. It's still giving, the $9.96 in there. So that's something that's still the same as the previous one. Although it does do a good job on the deep sea monster one, where both the word problem it gets right and the mathematical version it gets right in there as well. So have a look at the rest of those. So if you want to play with Grok, you can actually then play with the 70 billion model quite easily in here. So I've set this up where you can basically just use your Grok API key. Interestingly, Grok has sort of added names to these. If we come in and look at the Grok playground, we can see that they've basically given it Llama-3.1-8B is instant, 70B is versatile, and 405 is reasoning. Now, at the time when I'm recording this, the 405 doesn't seem to be working in here, but the 70 billion certainly seems to be working in here. So this is just basically setting it up to do the chat completion in here. There's one there with the 70 billion one, and there's one there with the 8 billion model. And then you can basically turn it into a function. And I just run through that same GSM 8K question that it was getting wrong before on the 8 billion. And sure enough, now on the 70 billion, we can see that it's actually getting it right here. And it seems to give a nice breakdown here as well, going through that. So it does seem if you've got access to Grok, the 70 billion model is pretty snappy as well here. And it looks like that pretty soon they will have the 405 billion, which you'll be able to try out as well in here. Speaking of the 405 billion version, if you do want to actually try this now, Meta is saying that they're hosting this on their Ask Meta, but I think it only kicks in for certain queries. So it looks like they're using some kind of LLM router kind of thing, where if it's a hard query, then it diverts to the 405, whereas if it's an easier query, it diverts to one of the small models. But you can come here and try this out yourself and see how it goes. Overall, Meta has clearly put a lot of work into this release. You can see things like the prompt format and stuff like that. There's some small changes now in there for fine tuning, things that people had issues with before. They seem to have paid attention and updated quite a number of those. Another interesting thing just to finish out is one of the research scientists that worked on this, Ashton Zhang, mentions in here that they actually integrated image, video, and speech capabilities into Llama 3, enabling models to recognize images and videos and support interaction via speech. They are under development and not yet ready for release. So it does seem like there's a big multimodal version that they're not talking about that much publicly in the release so far, but is probably on the way. So that's certainly going to be interesting to play with when that comes out as well. Anyway, have a play with the model. As always, I've put the notebooks and the code in the description below. If you've got any observations or any questions, please put them in the comments below. As always, if you found the video useful, please click like and subscribe, and I will talk to you in the next video. Bye for now.